All right, we'll call this meeting of the Ethics and Election Committee to order, and we'll start with some introductions. Let's start with Dean.
City Council.
Austin Davidson.
Forrest Dunbar.
Barbara Jones.
Sandy Trenny, Representative Trenny.
And Pete Peterson.
You want to announce yourself? No?
And so let's talk about some new business. Federal judge allowed the Florida voters more time to fix their signatures on their, I guess they must have been absentee ballots. And so this might be something that might be a new trend nationwide. And since we vote by mail here in Alaska, we might want to give our voters a little more time to fix their signatures. So I think that's why we're putting this on the agenda today.
Right, Mr. Chair. We wanted to point this out to you. In the Florida case, I didn't print the actual ruling, but the judge did allow voters additional time to count their ballots. The problem in Florida, which is very different than Anchorage, is some of those voters were never offered an opportunity to cure. And so I think that that's really significant. So you can read the Florida article, and again, like I said, I don't have the exact facts of what that law is, but I've attached our code, and it's AMC 28.70.030. And on the second page, I've highlighted the important text. And so what happens if there's a missing or invalid signature under our code is that the clerk has 3 days after initial adjudication of the envelope to send a letter to the voter explaining the lack of a valid signature. So far so good. We made that date consistently in 2018. But the letter is sent to the address to which the ballot is made. In 2A, it included a form that said, we have a problem with your signature. The form said you can return it in person, you can return it by fax, you can return it by email, or you can return it by mail. All right, so we gave voters lots of options to return that document.
Right.
And then the last option, if the signature is still invalid, the voter is going to be notified in writing. Well, that didn't happen. We never had any voters that were given an opportunity to cure, that attempted to cure, that we rejected. As far as signature or lack of signature, the only problem that we had was we told a voter that they voted a duplicate ballot and that there were 2 ballots in an envelope, and we told that voter, you have to re-vote. And we sent that voter a letter, and I think that voter sent something back in and said, same thing, and then that one ultimately was rejected. So there was only one, but no other voters were rejected because they didn't respond or the signature was invalid the second time. So I think we have a good process that would pass constitutional muster.
So do you think 3 days is enough time, though? I mean, should we give ourselves a little more time?
It's not 3 days. It's what it is. Let me get a calendar here. It's 3 days from initial adjudication. So that means we receive the envelope. We have to send you the letter within 3 days. But you actually have, in the letter, it says, let me find the date here. You have until the public session of canvass to correct it. So the public session of canvass was on the 13th. So if you voted on election day and we got it, we had to notify you within 3 days, or by Friday, you had until Friday the 13th at the beginning of the public session of Canvas to notify us, so you would have had a full week. If you voted early, so the ballots were mailed on the 12th, so if you actually voted on the 13th, you'd get the letter within 3 days, or it would have to be mailed within 3 days. So let's say we mailed it on Friday again, then you would have 1, 2, 3, 4 weeks to correct it. So I think that we certainly pass constitutional muster.
Okay.
Well, good.
Yeah, I thought that was important for you to know since that topic has been in the press.
Because I know that we got an email from someone who thought it was crazy to allow the voters in Florida's ballots to be counted. Because he thought everything, if it's not counted on election day, they shouldn't count.
Yeah.
Well, that's ridiculous. Because then all of your absentee ballots, especially from overseas military, would have no chance of getting there in time, for the most part. And so you would basically be now allowing people who were out of state or out of, traveling that day, votes to be counted, which is ridiculous to me.
We've talked about that in a different context, Mr. Chair, and that is the context of postmarked by Election Day or received by Election Day. And in that context, that would be the business reply mail.
Yeah.
And that's a debate that the Assembly still probably can continue to have, but it would be a huge change to say received by Election Day. I think that we received as many ballots the day after Election Day as we did on Election Day and the day before. So I think those 3 days were all about 10,000 ballots.
Right.
Right. And I think the preference for all of us is postmarked, but remember there was a question about, if we could do prepaid postage, right? Isn't that
That's the question.
That's why that would potentially be the trade-off.
Yeah.
Wait, sorry, Forrest, could you explain that?
Well, we could do prepaid postage. I'm not using the right term, but so people have to buy a stamp. But the problem is they don't postmark those,
So we wouldn't know when people.
so we wouldn't know when they
No,
sent them.
it's
So we
mail.
would have to do a hard,
Yep.
tougher cutoff, and I think that's not a trade-off we're willing to make, or at least I'm not willing to make, especially because it would cost us another $100,000 or something. So
we could do, sorry to interrupt, we could do a prepaid, or we could just include stamps or something that would be postmarked, right? It would just be more expensive.
Well,
'Cause you could
So-
get a bulk rate.
so you are correct. So if you put postage on all of the envelopes, the cost is double. It would be about $200,000 because
God, that
you'd
adds
have
up
to
quick.
put, postage
Yeah.
goes up, it's 50 cents an envelope, and we mailed 194,000 envelopes. So you would have to prepay and put postage on every one of those envelopes. We couldn't do it last year because they said, we don't have 194,000 stamps. So that's the one issue. But if you do business reply mail, then it's only about 100,000 because you only get charged for the ones that are returned, but there's no postmark.
yeah. So I think our interim solution for the next cycle, at least, is we're going to expand the number of drop boxes. Right. That's
Correct.
the hope that people don't have to mail it; they can just go to a drop box.
And I think the longer that we use the drop boxes and have vote by mail, I think more people will continue to use the drop boxes once they've found them, and if it's at all convenient on the way to work or on the way home from work or whatever,
Yeah.
they'll be using those drop boxes more, I expect.
Yeah.
And I think the statistics, even from the April election, show that between the drop boxes, the accessible vote centers, and we did have a drop off at the senior centers, and then our faxes. So the total of those types of delivery was over 52%, and mail was was less than that. So mail was lower considering all the alternative forms of delivery. And I anticipate that, as the chair said, will continue to increase.
I
Dean?
remember that, I'm sorry,
Go ahead, Dean.
the statistic from some other jurisdictions for like 70% used drop boxes or mail.
That is correct.
Do you think the numbers will change as the years go by?
I think that Mr. Dunbar has said, if we have more drop boxes, yes.
Mr. Dunbar?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Now I'm blanking what I was going to say. I know we never really stood up our legislative committee this year, unfortunately, because of what was going on in the election, because we had a very busy, municipal schedule. But I do think that this is a topic that we should consider for the next time we do a legislative request, is a change in the state law to allow people to give stamps and not consider it a form of, what's the term, like a compensation for voting. Because that's been the Department of Elections interpretation, and there are those specific exemptions in state law, and a stamp should be added. I think that would go a long way to alleviating people's concerns that folks can't vote.
That,
Right, well, and then you would get to a situation where a political organization of some type could mail voters,
Right.
A stamp or a ballot with the stamp on it,
Right.
or
Or
something.
churches could give out stamps and say, "We don't care who you vote for, but here's your opportunity to vote. Here's a
Right.
stamp." Or whomever.
To encourage participation in our electoral system.
Sure.
yeah.
Austin?
I'm just sort of thinking through that, and it's sort of more money in the process, right? So if you have money, if you're a group that has money to provide stamps to thousands of people.
Yeah.
So I think there's some pros and cons.
Well, I mean,
We
it's
obviously want more people to vote, but I'm concerned about who then votes if certain people, I don't know. I guess I don't know how many people would actually vote if they're given a stamp versus not receiving a stamp.
Well, we received a bit of feedback last year that we should have prepaid, and it's not something that's practical at this time, I don't think, and for us to do it. And so we're thinking about ways to do it. And I think also to me, it's analogous to driving someone to the polls, which is probably costs more in gas, but is totally legal. But the state law has certain exemptions, and stamps aren't one, because when it was written, vote by mail wasn't a thing.
But driving someone to the polls takes an incredible amount of manpower and staff time. And so organizations that have money that want to interfere with elections or encourage people to vote for their candidates have a lot lower likelihood of being able to drive thousands of people to the polls, whereas they could send, some organization could send everyone a stamp.
That would be perfect.
Yeah.
Then they would have no
Then
electoral advantage.
then we would have the problem. But they
Right.
could send just registered Democrats. I've heard the same thing about we wish that stamps were given out generally, but I think we should just be careful about what we're encouraging if we're asking for that
Yeah, a
exemption.
candidate could go down his walking list and send a stamp to everyone who he had ID'd as saying they were going to vote for him. Or,
Sure.
And then there would be nothing wrong with that. It would be legal if.
Right now they
If
can drive each of those people to the polls if they wanted to.
That's true.
Yeah.
But they never would. You have to realize there's a difference in giving out thousands of stamps versus
Yeah, but the whole purpose of vote by mail is to make it easier for people to vote.
But I think it's making it easier for everyone to vote. So there's
well,
some question.
if one
about-
candidate, it's true. But I think you have people involved in a sort of competitive process here, and if one side started doing it, the other side would do it too. And it's ultimately not that much money when you split it up amongst a bunch of organizations. It's a lot of money for us to do it.
Yeah, I'm not saying we should do it. I'm just throwing that point out there.
Mrs. Straney, did you have something?
Are you looking, Margaret, about where you're going to put the drop boxes as far as lower socioeconomic, where you may not, most people don't do things by mail anymore, where that may be more of a problem?
So currently, what has happened, we had 12 drop boxes in April. And those 12 drop boxes, there's 2 in every assembly district. So after the special election, one of the biggest complaints, we focused on the complaints. And the biggest complaint was the one at Spenard Rec Center, in West Anchorage. So we added one at West High. The West High one was really, really highly used. So we will continue the one at West High. Then we also added one here at City Hall and one at the election center. So that will be the plan for 2019, just to add those three. I think we're probably going to buy a fourth, but we don't have a location for it specifically yet. We have to negotiate with whoever owns the property to place it there.
Right.
So then the plan would be to add 2 a year after that, unless if we have money that isn't spent for some reason, then we'll come back to this committee and ask you, we think we should add another one at this location.
I thought there was talk of adding another one in East Anchorage. Is that not?
Oh, you know what? It was Begich Middle School.
School,
That's
right.
right. I think you're correct. So that might be where that fourth one goes.
Right.
Does that mean if we add the one at West High School, does that mean we would have 3 in West Anchorage and only 2 in every other district?
It does, or we could move that one from Spenard. The concern that we have is, so if we add like 2 a year,
Yeah.
so now downtown would
Right.
have 4.
Yeah, I'm fine with the downtown having all the drop boxes. I'm not literally, but I'm fine with them having a disproportionate number because everybody drives downtown. I'm a little bit concerned if, for example, South Anchorage got 1 and East Anchorage didn't, or West Anchorage got 1 and Midtown didn't.
Okay.
Same.
Downtown is special, and I'm willing to accept that, but West Anchorage is no more special than East Anchorage. Let's throw that out there.
You're entitled to your opinion.
I'm wondering, because they've got, West High, you're going to have all the personnel to teach at West High.
Yeah.
It's not an area of town that I think there's the need that they don't have a stamp. Or I'd rather see one at Muldoon,
Yeah.
maybe even that mall where they have the rec center.
Boys and Girls Club. I think
Yeah, Boys and Girls Club rather than Baggage.
I think we had some talk about that. And I think it works better at Begich, but either way, they're both in Muldoon. I think you're right, and that also is my preference. But yeah, this is it's kind of a sticky wicket.
It is. So we can take a look at that. The issue is that the mall is probably privately owned.
Yeah,
that's correct.
Begich is owned by the school district or the municipality. We already have an existing agreement with them, so we can place the box there. Currently, we have no boxes on private property. They're all on public property, and the only oddball is the UAA Alaska Airlines Center, but I still think that that's UAA property.
Yeah, actually, do you know who owns that mall?
No, it doesn't.
Dan Coffey.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I'm wondering though, because there's a lot of low, probably with smaller kids, that they may be more familiar going to one of the elementary schools that are across the street from Muldoon on each of them rather than the middle school.
Walking
A lot of the middle school people that come from further down. They come from Boniface
Yeah.
Boniface goes to Clark. All right. But I'm thinking, because you've got good population to the south of that is not going to be worried about a stamp, where if you go down to Muldoon,
Yeah.
there's going to be more.
It's true. Although I think our other one is at Bartlett. Is that right?
Yeah.
Which I guess is also challenging to walk to, but is sort of in that area.
So,
But,
One
the
of the
thing about
elementary schools.
Begich Middle School, that if you don't live near it, you don't realize how many people from the community use that daily, that track. There's hundreds of people that are out walking or jogging around that track every night, or playing basketball if it's, that not in the winter. And so I think there's just a lot of people that go to the Begich Middle School for one reason or another, besides dropping their kids off to school. And it's well-known, people know it, and they do have public meetings there quite often, so I think that's a good location for one. So,
Just my familiarity with that type of population, and I taught my last 4 years at Ptarmigan, which is right in the middle of that. I would say you're going to get a higher socioeconomic going to Bartlett than you are going to Muldoon or one of the elementary schools. Just
Yeah,
they don't
interesting.
recreate. Basketball is there, but you don't get a lot of that in the poor populations. They're busy working, and I don't think they're out there in the public as much as that. And I've taught, at Fairview also for quite a number of years, that population is just a little different.
Austin.
Oh, I was just going to ask, what is the process for determining where all the drop boxes go? Is this it, and then you make a decision, or how was that decided, say, last time?
Well, the last time what happened is we had the stakeholders group, and the stakeholders group finished in April after the election.
And who's that?
The stakeholders group is about 50 people. It started out as 20. Interestingly, a church group was invited. We invited some elected officials to serve on it. We invited nonprofits. The post office is on it. Everyone that we considered the League of Women Voters. We just invited business people. It's just really, really super diverse. The idea was we're testing out this idea and we need input from our community. So our perception is that the stakeholders group represents the community. Mm-hmm. There are lots of people that come that are not an official member of the stakeholders, but they just sign a thing and we invite them to every meeting and everybody gets to sit at the table and talk. And so when we were looking at drop boxes, we had maps all around the room and we said, these are, public spaces. What do you think about these locations for the drop boxes? And the stakeholders voted. And then after the stakeholders voted and picked a variety of locations, we started negotiating with those locations. And then we came up with an agreement to place them, and we have a liability agreement with the school district about where, and then we had to go to the Parks and Recreation Board. So it took a lot of work in 2016 to get those placed, because we placed 4 in 17 and then we placed all 12 last year.
Great. Wow, sounds like a great process. And so now you're considering adding how many more?
Well, the plan, I knew that it was 4. I forgot about Begich, but I think you're right. The other question about East Anchorage was an accessible vote center at Anchorage. So we know we have to add that one at West High, and I think the issue with the West Anchorage one is that Spenard is rec center is like over here, like a dead end.
Yeah.
And West is on everybody's way somewhere else. And that's why I think West High worked better than Spenard. And I don't think the plan is to take one away, because I think once
you have one there,
exactly. So the other plan was we need one here at City Hall, we need one at the Election Center, and then the 4th one I just didn't remember. I think you might be right that it was East Anchorage that we had a bunch of requests, but the other request for East Anchorage was an accessible vote center.
Yeah.
So we currently have 5 accessible vote centers. Those are, of course, City Hall, the Election Center, the LUSAC Library, Eagle River, and those are fairly standard. We've had those forever. We have had one at the airport and UAA on Election Day, but they are not very high volume locations.
Yeah.
So we decided not to do those. But after we had these 4 announced, someone came and said, I think that you have a problem because you don't have one in South Anchorage, and you have, like 50,000 voters that are south of Tudor. And the person told me that they believed that those were mostly conservative voters and that the downtown voters were more liberal, and they thought that that was a concern. So we got the map out and I said, pick a location, tell me where you think we should go. And interestingly, the project manager was here at the time and knew that the golf course was a muni facility. And so the golf course suited the South Anchorage, and so we added that during the election process. It was just added. But we were trying to respond to voter concerns. So now the other concern is East Anchorage doesn't have one. And so we need one in East Anchorage, and maybe that might be something that would be good at that mall. Because we could set up a location. It's a little bit more difficult because one of the things that we have to have is a secure place to lock up the ballots and the computers at night. Well, at the golf course, they had to bring the computers and the ballots back every single night. They had to bring them back to the election center and then take them back out. We could do that, and that might be a solution.
So there'll be a total of how many drop boxes when we're done then?
Well, we were just gonna, right now there's 12, and we're gonna order 4 more. So we'd be at 16. But I have a note that says, maybe we need to order 4 more and get one in every district. And I'm not positive I
Well-
can get that done or get an agreement for all of them.
I had forgotten that we had a accessible vote center in Eagle River and one at the golf course. That seems that there's no accessible vote center in West Anchorage. There's no one in East Anchorage, right?
That is correct.
So we actually already overrepresented Eagle River, at least in terms of their coverage, because then they have 2 drop boxes and an accessible vote center.
Correct.
And then South Anchorage had the same deal.
Correct.
And neither East Anchorage nor West Anchorage had that kind of benefit. So I think it's kind of funny that they said that conservatives were underrepresented. They already had an accessible vote center in Eagle River, but so I don't know if we need to go to every. I mean, they're not cheap, right? I mean, they cost a little money to buy and install. So
Right. They're not. It's less than $2,000 per Dropbox for the Dropbox and shipping.
oh, really? I thought it was like 10. Okay.
The problem is that then we need to do the decals and get them set, and we move them in and out. So it does get expensive and time consuming. But I think maybe we could look at if we look at the combination drop boxes and accessible vote centers for each district, I think we can come up with a fair way to make sure that everyone has access to a drop box or accessible vote center.
So do we know how many drop boxes they have down in King County? I mean, I know their population's like 4 times bigger than ours, but I mean, where they have 50 or something, or do we know?
I don't know the answer to that off the top of my head, but I can find out for you, and it is definitely more than what we have. And we've always had this plan that we would start small and add, especially where we didn't know how popular they would be, and it looks like they're going to be popular. So I think we could start adding incrementally as we're proposing right now.
Okay. All right, great. Well, I suppose, does anyone want to talk about Saturday is election day? Eric's not here. And so
I think we have discussed it in the past. I think there are some logistical challenges with it, and I also think that it's largely been what it's trying to solve has been partially, not completely, but partially solved by vote by mail, right? So I recommend that we take it off of the agenda going forward until Eric wants to come back and put it back on.
I think that makes a lot of sense too.
okay. All right, fine. Well, let's go to old business B, and we'll talk a little bit about Title 28.
Okay, so I will start the discussion about Title 28, and Dean can jump in. We are progressing. Our drafting committee, as some of you know, is Dean, me, Amy Solberg, Dennis Wheeler, and Becky Wint Pearson. And we are progressing through Title 28. I think we're about halfway. We've got some great proposed changes that we would like to see happen. I'm not positive that any of them are urgent because we're only halfway through. I don't think that we're going to have a proposal for you before January, I typically do not recommend election changes after the end of January, when, or even after, I just don't recommend that. So we can wait until the end of the election if we don't have I thought we would have a document to propose to you today. We just don't. So that might have to wait until after the election.
All right.
Mr. Peterson, can I ask a question?
All right, Mr. Dunbar.
Barbara, could you just, for myself, but also for people who might be listening to this recording, could you say what Title 28 is, and then also kind of what kind of changes are you looking at, like very generally?
So Title 28 is the elections code, and the changes that we're making are almost entirely clarifications. For example, when we wrote the code, we included poll-based elections and vote-by-mail elections. And we did that on purpose because we didn't know what the future would bring. Well, now we see in some places we weren't quite as clear as we could have been. We kind of commingled poll-based and by mail in some circumstances, and we're just making it clearer.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Okay. So, any discussion about Title II?
Well, I think I'll let Dean and Austin talk about Title II.
Sure. Would you like to, Dean, or you want me to?
You can do it.
Okay.
Sure. I think
So-
we're on top of everything so far.
We'll see. So Dean and Amy Solberg and Barbara and I have been working on making some changes to Title II. Those relate specifically to when we have a special election. So when a vacancy occurs on the assembly, whether we do a special election or appoint someone, and what the process is for appointment. So we've mostly been just doing some cleanup language. We've been looking at a lot of things like what the charter provides and what the code language is, and just talking about different options. And we have some drafts, but they're still in pretty rough form. And for the reasons Barbara listed, elections coming up, we think it probably makes sense to wait until after April. But if we get something really quickly, we'll bring it to you. But we think we'll wait a little bit.
Well, and I was reading your working document before I came in here today, and I thought most of the changes you had in there were made sense to me. So I didn't see anything I thought would be controversial. But you haven't made it all the way through. So we're probably in the same situation as Title 28. We may be running a little behind on the rewrite, and so we might have to wait till after the election.
Yeah.
But, the situation that seems to be developing now, if you believe what was written in the paper or what you saw on the TV news, we may have a member resigning to take a post with the state.
Yeah.
And the fact that Amy is up for re-election in April, and it's less than 6 months till April, means that we actually don't have to have a special election. We can actually appoint someone to fill that vacancy until the election in April.
And,
Forrest?
Oh, so two things on that. One, I don't think we need to necessarily wait for this rewrite till after the election. I don't think the election is really kind of a relevant point for the Title II rewrite she's talking about, because we're in that 6-month window. I do think that, if we tried to rush something through right now, it would be seen as somehow connected to Amy leaving, which
Right.
Amy Dembosky leaving, which is obviously not the case, but we want to make sure that doesn't get murky.
Right.
And so if we hold off for that, I think that's perfectly legitimate. The other thing I'll say is, and this is related to Title II, it is not clear from our law or from the state law that you couldn't both serve as a commissioner you couldn't be a commissioner, right? Because it is something about like being the head of an executive body. Mm-hmm. But you could be the chief of staff to the governor, which is a full-time job in Juneau, and still be on the Anchorage Assembly. Mm-hmm. And that is something I think we might want to consider. I mean, if we could change our own laws to make that not legal, right, to force a resignation. Not that we should in this case, but I think it's pointed out. And sometimes hard cases, it points out a gap in your law, and I think that is a gap in our law, that you could have that kind of job and still be on the assembly.
Interesting.
Does current law say anything about living a certain amount of time out of district? I know you have to live in the district.
It says something like you
Oh,
have to live
interesting.
in the district at the time of election and throughout it was like something sort of vague, like how much of, Dean probably knows better than I do.
Yeah, the charter has some language about that. It says you have to be a resident of the district, but you run in and remain a resident of that district to your term.
I think that I think we should look at that issue because the school board had that issue where someone was living out of state, working out of state, let me put it that way, but still claimed residency. And remember, if you look at the definition of residency in state law, it's intent to return.
Right.
So I think that's something that we could look at.
Well, also by permanent fund qualification, you can't be out for more than a certain amount of period. Also, to get COLA, if you're retired, you can't leave. You have to not be out a certain amount of time too. That might be something.
But that's not a requirement for voting, which is what we look at, because that's how we determine qualifications. And voters can live out of state for a very long time as long as they have an intent to return. For example, someone in the military, they may not get their COLA, they may not get their PERS retirement, they may not get a dividend, but if they have an intent to return, they can be a registered voter of Alaska, and that would qualify them to be an assembly candidate.
Right. Dean?
The charter uses the word remain a resident and the definition of resident. And there's a few places you can see the definition of how that. So the assembly, though, is the judge of its elections and qualification of assembly members. So I guess that would be where if somebody's moved away and they're not a resident anymore, assembly would determine if it's vacant because they're no longer a resident or not. I think that's how that would happen, but I don't have a precedent to base that on. It's just my read of how it would work. And who makes that call about whether they are no longer a resident of the district that they represent.
Right, so if someone decided they were going to buy a new house in a different part of town than what they were representing, then officially, once they moved in, they wouldn't be a resident in their current district anymore, and so they actually wouldn't legally be allowed to represent that area. Is that correct?
Yeah. For example, some definitions of residents say you live there or intend to remain as your principal place of abode. So how do you determine that? And I'm sorry, there is a definition for resident in the charter. It's in a different section. I just pulled it up. I guess it says it means a person whose habitual physical dwelling place is within the area in question and who intends to maintain the person's dwelling place in that area. So it doesn't have X number of days or whether you bought property. It's about your intent to remain as your main place of habitual dwelling.
So I guess maybe if your intent was to live above the restaurant along Muldoon Road, this was an election from a dozen years or so. A guy claimed he was living above his restaurant on Muldoon Road, but in fact he was driving home and living with his wife in his $350,000 house, which wasn't in the district that he had filed to run for I think it was the assembly.
Well, I like the most recent example where the guy.
Was there Mia Costello?
It was Earl Mayo.
Yeah,
I remember. It was a Wilikowski.
Opponent.
Yeah, I think he might have been elected to the Senate in that race.
Nice.
First time.
Okay. Well, interesting issue.
Yeah. Okay. Well, any other election business we need to discuss why we're here today?
Mr. Chair, I don't know if you want to have a meeting in December. but you may, and I think since you're the fourth Wednesday in November or December, you may want to change that. We can discuss that after this. But we should probably give you an update at your next meeting. Maybe we'll have a special meeting in January and just give you an overall election update.
So the fourth Wednesday's the 26th. Yeah, that's probably not going to go over real well.
You
So
know,
we could move it up to the 19th if that date you think might work for people.
I won't be able to come because we have a health policy committee that same day, but we could find a time that other committees were
The
on.
health policy meets at noon,
12:30.
12:30.
give me this, start at 11:30.
We might, if we started a half hour earlier.
Yeah, we could do that.
I'm hoping that I won't be here on the 19th. I've asked the chair if I could take that time off, but Amy could give you an update.
Okay. Well, and if it turns out that it doesn't look like we need a meeting, we could not have one in December, and then maybe if we felt we needed to, we could have more than one in January.
Speaking for Dick, I'll be coming back from the wedding that day. He was the one to drive him.
Could he
So
call
he'd have to
in?
call in.
Yeah.
On the 19th.
Mhm.
Okay. All right. Well, yeah. So if we wouldn't have a quorum, then that would probably be a good idea not to have a meeting.
Well, you only need 3 for a quorum.
Three. That's true.
Yeah.
So we'll have to see. But all right, we'll continue that discussion between now and then, and see if something comes up that we feel that we need to definitely have a meeting to discuss that. Okay, if there's nothing else, we can go to audience participation. Hey, go ahead.
My name is Eugene Carhaven. I represent myself. I live in Upstate Valley. I follow public process. Public process done per the decision made by the governing body. More like public interest. First, looking at the agenda, some of these things I'm about to say is I've said in the past, but to conduct a policy is a difference. I only think you do a roll call. The members present, the committee members present. Introductions should be audience introductions, but you're not doing that, and you make sure you just identify yourselves that way, except for people like myself here. And also another that concerns me is I'm glad the meeting's being taped and thankful for that. But this idea of a free-for-all where people are speaking without getting permission to chair is a problem with people to be able to, when they listen to tape either tomorrow, whenever that tape is available, or a year from now, it's going to be very difficult for people to identify who's really speaking. So it's the responsibility of the chair to ensure order and to give permission for the parties to speak and identify them so it's clearly noted that who is speaking and what voice that is. And then I guess that's it, except I'll say something that's non-political in this meeting, but for all your safety, please be careful on the roads. The temperatures are changing, and it could turn into an ice skating rink. So when you leave the next 24 hours, be very careful. And that's all I have to say. And that plays with approximately 1 minute and 23 seconds to spare.
Nice.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, I guess with that, we're adjourned.